bonus move's been unlocked, and we can now play Samurai Kirby. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Kirby Superstar Ultra. In the last part we went through the rest of Meta-Knightmare Ultra, and now it's time for us to start off the boss rushes with the arena. Why can't people stop fighting? When the pink terror raises his fist, even the strong tremble in fear. Time for even more speed up, but of a different kind. The arena is a giant boss rush that you go through that's mostly randomized in terms of the order you go through it. At the start here you have a choice of any of the powers you want. You can even make a helper in doing so, but something I don't do here and I don't recommend you do because of it. If you make a helper or bring in a second player in the original Superstar, because this was still in the original, you're locked into bosses with more health, which kinda sucks. My main strategy for basically any of the arenas, if I'm just trying to get 100% on the save file, which is the end goal of this LP, is to just pick Plasma and move left and right over and over again, build up that charge, and release, because that does about a sixth to an eighth of a boss's health in one blow if you max it all the way up. The arena is the place you need to remember you have the guard, though, because healing items are low in amount. You only get them between bosses at that. With that said, let's talk about that little healing moment. Between every boss, you are sent to a rest area, as we're about to be in a moment. The rest area has a warp star in it, and potentially 1 or 2 power essences for you to copy from. It also has 5 Maximatoes. With that said, use those sparingly because once they're used up, they don't respawn. In their place, after you've used one, will be just a normal tomato food, and if you use that, it doesn't respawn. And after that, there's no more food in that location. So you have a total of 5 full heals and 5 partial heals. That might sound a little limiting, but honestly it's more than enough as long as you are good at keeping your distance from the boss fights. Speaking of the boss fights, let's talk about what's actually in here. Since this is the only one of the arenas that was in the original Kirby Superstar, it's every boss that was in the original Kirby Superstar, barring Kracko Jr. for some reason. You fight the first, what is that, like 20 some odd fights in a random order every time you play, but you always end with a refight against Marks from the end of Milky Way Wishes. Speaking of which, I know it's rather atypical of me to be talking over a boss rush, but that's because there's at least some amount of strategy you can do to this compared to, say, a Mega Man one, where it's just fight the bosses again. You're gonna want to stay a distance basically every single fight in this section if you can, unless you're someone who prefers attacks like Hammer or Sword where you need to be closer up, in which case you need to be a little more careful and more liberal with your use of the guard button than I am already in this playthrough. The other thing I should note is that there's 2 distinct fights in the arena that are not against normal bosses. It's against a marathon of about 3 to 4 mini-bosses in a row. One of them is Chef Kawasaki, Bonkers, and Bugsy. The other is the Poppy Bros boss, Mr. Frosty, Iron Man, and Ju-Kid. I would say in general, you really want to hope that you get some of the bosses you don't like at the start of the arena, so that way you can probably just hopefully coast through the rest of it. But since you end with Marks no matter what, you want to make sure you have at least 1 Maximato left, if not enough health items left to have a full health bar for Marks, or at least as close as you can get, because Marks is easily the hardest individual fight out of all these. And since you only can do this on 1 life, you need to be very careful. Speaking of which, the way I'm structuring every single arena fight in this playthrough is we show the last fight at normal speed at the least, if not the last couple if it's something a little special. Because it's the set fight there, I guess is the way my brain processed it. Sort of like, to me, how you fight Wily at the end of the boss rush stage of some of the Mega Man games, for the Wily machine at least. They're kind of inconsistent about that, like Mega Man 2 did it, I want to say Mega Man 9 did it, and a couple others did, but it's 50-50 really. Additionally, Marks is one of the only 2 bosses in the game we've only fought once at this point, on top of Meta Knight. So, in case you want to get more about the strategy there, maybe. Unfortunately, I did lose Plasma at Meta-Knightmare because I forgot you could just wait and he'll eventually kick the sword away, but it was taking longer than my ADHD decided to wait for some reason, so here we are with Beam, which is that's good enough. Beam at least has the advantage of having a very high damage output for the rate at which you can throw out attacks, because its main attack does a lot of damage and can even hit once or twice depending on where you are, and its charge beam is pretty good for the few times that marks might be towards the bottom of the screen, for instance, like right now, but then you really have to get out of the way quick. If memory serves, though, we actually get to see every single one of Mark's attacks in this run, such as his giant laser when he barfs up the little bombs that the first time he uses it lands on the floor and then explodes, but the second time he uses it when he's lower on HP, tracks onto you to explode, altitude-wise. As well as, I think he's actually about to do it like in the next second or two, when he splits himself in half and becomes a giant black hole that can absorb you and does mass damage. That actually would be a running theme for super bosses in the franchise. Yeah, here it is. You don't get actively pulled into it, like it's not, you have to fight the current, but the range it can suck you in from is decisively large, so stay towards either side of the screen, or if you see him starting the animation, run to the opposite side of the screen from where he is if he's on more, if he's closer to an extreme, because he doesn't always do it in the exact center. It's not an instant kill, but I believe it does at least half your health, so be careful with that. And there he goes. That's the arena. It's not what I would call super hard compared to some other endless boss rush challenges, but it does require some amount of strategy, and you're going to want to get used to it because the next two modes are basically just this again in different flavors. Speaking of which, we can now play Helper's a Hero, the last normal board they add to the bulletin board, as well as Megaton Punch, the last of the mini-games. We'll be taking a look at all 5 of those at the end of the video. 96%, we're getting there. Helper to Hero is complicated. Kirby's not the only hero. Helpers can be heroes too. We'll prove it in an all-star battle. That's pretty literal, honestly. So here's your player select. You get to choose between any of the 20 power-up helpers in the game, and we have to go through a set order of 13 bosses. These enemies aren't one-to-one to Kirby's powers either. Some of them have added benefits, like the Plasma Wisp can actively fly without having to like mash the jump button, so you can just press up and move upwards in the screen. Notably, I don't technically do everything I can with this, because you do get a specific screen for this saying you've become a hero, as well as a ribbon, I believe, on the bulletin board for completing this mode with every single one of the 20 helpers. But at the end of the day, I did not care to beat this mode with Wing or Stone especially, so I didn't do that. It's not required for the 100% marker on the file select screen, so that was the reasoning I used for this. With that said, let's talk about the order you fight the bosses in. You start with Wispy Woods, you go through Mid-Boss, All-Stars 1, Krako, King Dedede, Dynablade, Fatty Whale, Camelio Arm, the second All-Stars, Mid-Boss Rush, Twin Woods, Heavy Lobster, Computer Virus, the variant of it from Milky Way Wishes, Meta Knight, into the final boss duo, because you do the last 2 fights in sort of a rush. Helper to Hero is, I think, a pretty cool addition to the game overall. Honestly, it's probably the most original one, too, if only because you at least get to control something you couldn't control as the first player in the original Kirby Superstar. There are some kind of weird omissions from this boss rush, like Marks, the cannon from the halberd, Lololo, La La La, and such. But I want to say it might be because they're trying to just select bosses from the original game that you fought twice. That's why I think even Meta Knight's completely absent. So maybe that's why we fought so many bosses multiple times, maybe. It's kind of confusing, but at the end of the day, it's just a simple, fun mode. I appreciate the aesthetic, and I appreciate that the helpers have some active gameplay differences from Kirby. This sort of mode would kind of return in some games, namely Star Allies would allow you to play as several of the helpers, as well as just random enemies and NPCs throughout the series, like Ribbon from Kirby 64. I'm not sure how I'm gonna handle that if and when we ever get to Kirby Star Allies. I'll have to figure that out when the day comes. With that said, the last fight you get into is always Wham Bam Rock, which might seem a little disappointing. That's because it's not all we're doing here. With that said, Plasma, as you can see, very effective at getting through this. Again, it's arguably the best power in the game, barring maybe Jet, Hammer, and a couple other things. I think Hammer has technically the fastest damage output overall, just because you can get so many hits in quicker, but I prefer the keeping at a distance, charging up, and firing when I feel I'm safe aspects of Plasma. If anything, it's kind of like Mega Man in that regard. Once you've taken out Wham Bam Rock, the true final opponent spawns in. This is Wham Bam Jewel. Wham Bam Jewel's pattern is by and large the same as Wham Bam Rock, but there's some extra bits to it. For one thing, he can now actively fire a beam out of his index finger like Master Hand, Crazy Hand, Cannon, Smash, if you already thought that Wham Bam Rock was already sort of a prototype for that boss fight. His punches are faster, and they, I think, fly further, and they do more damage. He can drop some bombs occasionally whenever he causes things to rain from the sky. And I think he just has more health as well. With that said, that doesn't matter much to Plasma. I love this power. I think it eventually came back, or at least they eventually gave, like, Wisp a similar ability, or whatever the name of the other electric ability is. But for now, that's that. Wham Bam Jewel's not a lot to write home about because it's just a slightly harder version of a fight that's not too hard to begin with. But for defeating it, the true arena has now been unlocked. We'll be doing that next part though, because for the rest of this video, we are focusing instead on the minigames, like Megaton Punch. This is one that was in the original game. Also, hi Toad, Luigi, Mario, and Birdo. Megaton Punch is all about just maxing some meters as best you can and getting your timing right. First meter, you're filling top to bottom, and it peaks at the top. Second one, you're getting targets on top of each other. Third one, you're just timing a pendulum swing into the middle. The more levels you do, the better you need to get with your timing in order to actively beat the opponent. Out of all of the minigames, I think this is the one I'm overall the best at over the years. If only because the timing is a lot more reliable and you're not actively pressured by a timer above you. With that said, you don't get anything for playing these minigames. These are just for fun. In the original Kirby Superstar, you could play Megaton Punch or Samurai Kirby with the second player. You can't do that for these two minigames in Ultra, though. You can only do that for the 3 new minigames they added for Superstar Ultra. Samurai Kirby's the classic reaction game. I remember this originally from Nightmare in Dreamland in my lifetime. You wait for the exclamation point to show up and react as fast as you can to hopefully beat your opponent. I believe each opponent type has a set amount of frames they'll react to the exclamation point afterwards. That gets tighter and tighter as you go, and like I think Wheelie waits until like the 50 frame mark. The last 2 fights between D2D and Meta-Knight are very tight, because I think Meta-Knight almost universally is faster than me, because I usually react around the 12 to 15 frame mark. Meta-Knight I think is almost universally at like 11 frames. It's not deep, but it's silly and fun, and I like it for that. You can try to predict it, but if you press the button too early, you automatically lose. I like that this one's kind of kept on showing up over the years, and apparently the the Return to Dreamland remake's gonna have a Battle Royale version of this with 100 players, which, that's dumb, but funny. I like the idea. With that, let's now go over to the new minigames. This is Kirby Card Swipe. You are going to get a card marked on the top screen, and you have to be the first to touch it. And you have to remember which one's which. So, for instance, this is the ninja and the squid enemy. Top screen reveals the squishy. Tap that as fast as you can and be first. You only get 1 touch per round, and if you touch the cards too early, you actually are kicked out of the following round, so you might actually lose the game because of that. And the amount of cards that can be on screen varies, I believe, from 2 to 8. You can, I believe, tie in this, but it's not very likely overall. It's the first player to 3 cards that wins, if memory serves. It's the simplest of the new minigames, but it's also probably my favorite only because if you're playing with AI, it's also the easiest to win overall. Because, oh boy, Kirby on the draw is hard even on its first level. This is sort of a follow-up to classic NES and arcade shooter games where you're tapping the targets on the screen. But you only have a certain amount of shots at a time. We have, 8 shots, but you can touch the pink bar to reload, but that takes time. Each type of cutout that you shoot has a different point value. Bronto Bert's, Cappies, and Waddle Dees are 10. Knuckle Joes and Waddle Doos are 20. Chef Kawasaki and Bonkers are 40. DDD and Meta-Knight are 100. But hitting a bomber enemy loses you 50 points. In some ways, this minigame is also partially based off a minigame from the original Kirby's Adventure, which was sort of the precursor to Samurai Kirby. I think it was just called Quick Draw. Because of the Wild West theming, they changed it over to Samurai starting in, I think, actually Superstar. This is probably the favorite to play with friends, if only because it has the most active stuff going on. But for AI, it just gets weirdly tight towards the end because the AI gets real good at reacting. Hey, 420. Nice. With that, now let's head into the final minigame. And probably my least favorite conceptually. We're heading into Snack Tracks. Snack Tracks feels like a Mario Party minigame. They didn't want a Mario Party game, so they put it in Kirby. The 4 Kirbys are laying in front of conveyor belts. These will have food and Maximatoes on them that will slowly scroll towards you. Food's worth 3 points each, the Maximatoes are worth 6. But occasionally, bombs, the weird worm enemies, and rocks are going to be on the belt. Bombs clear all food on the belt if they explode and deduct 10 points, but you can move them to another belt by touching them. And that can actively destroy food on the enemy's track if it explodes. If it gets tossed around too much, though, it does automatically destroy. The worms deduct 2 points if you eat them, and they can be on the Maximato, so you might need to touch a Maximato to get rid of the worm first. Rocks are just cleared by touching them twice. Occasionally, you swap, I think it takes like 30 seconds, you swap to another track, so you need to kind of get adjusted to looking at a different track on the top screen and bottom screen. There's just something about this minigame that feels off, and I can't quite place what. It's not my favorite. It works, I guess. Just keep it away from me. Oh god, too many bombs. There we go. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 14, we're heading into the true arena to finish off the game. See you guys then.